Bringing Adorno into contact with Laplanche and Glissant, we may thus begin to understand what Adorno meant when he talked about approaching art objects, not to make the artwork like ourselves, but rather to make ourselves more like the artwork. Performance art and eroticism do not ask for our consent. We either give ourselves over to them, or we do not, which is a different way of saying that these regimes operate under the aegis of limit consent. This brings us to Mia. Mia arrived in our first consultation session 6 years too late, which is how long it took her to be able to ask for help. Not only, she told me, was she afraid that she would be made to talk about her traumatic childhood, but as a Black trans woman, she would not imagine feeling safe with any therapist. So fucked up is really the world. Her 3 previous consultations with other analysts had confirmed her concerns. So if she was sitting in my office at this moment, she wanted me to understand. It was not because she wanted to, but because she had to. Her relationship was declining, and transitioning was proving harder than she had expected. It did not take a psychoanalyst to sense the deep vulnerability lurking underneath the surface of Mia's matter-of-fact, no-bullshit demeanor. I instantly liked her. I listened carefully, asked a few questions, and made a comment that she seemed to find relevant. She softened a bit as we talked. At the end of our first meeting, which I thought had gone well, I asked her if she wanted to return to finish the consultation. She said she did. She asked about my fee. At that time, I was a second-year candidate building my private practice, which meant that my fees were comparatively low. I told her my fee, anxious that it would betray how green I was. Instantly, it made her angry. She could easily afford it, and she now revealed she was in possession of some wealth, but she said that it was more than she wanted to pay. She asked if I had sliding scale slots available. I said that I did, but that I reserved them for people whose need was financial. Predictably, this did not land well. Mia shot back that she found politically problematic my asking her to pay more simply because she had money. I was taken aback by her sense of entitlement. I started wishing I had brought up the fee myself on our initial call, even though she had not asked about it. Mia was now acting as if I had somehow tricked her by exciting a craving that came at too high a price. Then, as if something previously obscure had become illuminated, she pointed her finger at me and said, "I did not consent to this. I do not consent to this. You screwed me." I was momentarily frozen, watching myself as if in slow motion, shapeshift in Mia's mind into someone who violated her. I did not agree with her assessment of what had occurred. I wondered, and told her, if this to which she had not consented was more than just my fee, which by this point she had disdainfully informed me she intended to pay. Might it have something to do with her wanting to come back? "That's some bullshit," she replied. Time was up. We had to stop. I was more than a little relieved. The night prior to our second session, Mia had a sexual dream about me. She had been unable to dream in years, so this dream made her unexpectedly hopeful, convincing her that she should work with me. But this also intensified her feelings of vulnerability, so my having screwed her in the second session now took center stage. She recounted the dream, and then explained the predicament I had put her in. Had I mentioned my fee on the phone, she would have never made a first appointment. She would have never met me. She would not now be finding herself in the position of wanting to work with me, and therefore she would have never gotten into this mess, where her only option was to pay me an uncomfortable amount. But now it was too late. The damage was done. Since she now did not want to see someone else, she would have to submit to me. Furiously silent, Mia weighed her options. Finally, she said she could only see one way forward. She was willing to begin an analytic treatment with me, meeting 4 times a week, but only on the condition that we both understand that she would be entering analysis against her consent. Suffice to say, this did not thrill me. The work is hard enough as it is, and starting my analysis with someone who already felt that I had screwed her made me nervous. In all honesty, I had somewhat soured to the idea of working with her. If you are thinking that is already a lot of drama for 2 sessions, that is because it is. But I hasten to add, it is also how the work proceeds, through the patient's dynamics becoming dramatized, that is, enacted and lived out between the patient and the analyst through the action of the unconscious. Usually, however, it takes much longer for this kind of intensity to develop in a therapeutic relationship, and as such, these two sessions forecast a tumultuous treatment. So it may surprise you to hear that I accepted Mia's condition. There were several reasons. First, I was utterly fascinated by the way consent was being problematized. First, I was utterly fascinated by the way consent was being problematized so early on in the treatment. When referring to something becoming problematized, we usually mean that it is being turned into a problematic, converted from something self-evident to something that may be queried. In psychoanalytic work, something becomes problematized, not in the verbal dialogic exchange, but rather in the way it becomes inserted in the transference, not through words, but in the way it gets under the analyst's skin, in the way it acts on the analyst. In this case, then, on me. Second, although Mia and I had not yet explicitly spoken about our racial differences, and I would not until later in the treatment, I sensed, not yet able to articulate why, that Mia's insistence that the treatment was starting against her consent was less about the fee per se. Could the drama around it have been the medium through which something about race was getting played out in the session? In fact, the work that followed proved that that was the case. Racial differences entered the consulting room not through language about race or racism, but encoded in our discussion about consent. Last, I was especially intrigued that, in Mia's experience, I had somehow seduced her by arousing in her the longing to work with me. In those early meetings, Mia had not yet used the word seduction, as she later would, but the idea was presaged in her sexual dream of me. In the dream, she met someone who shared some physical feature with me for a blind date. The woman teased and then left her hanging out to dry. Mia was not right about my tricking her, but she was also not wrong. The analytic situation, in its promise of deep listening, in its offer of an unusual and outlandish intimacy, and in its careful guarding of the asymmetry between analyst and patient, always involves an inadvertent ethical seduction. Seduction, however, as the term is used by Laplanche, is not unique to the psychoanalytical situation. It is part of the process of human subjectivation overall. In other words, it is not a deceitful ruse by which the other is trapped, though it does involve an unauthorized trespass, in that the adult's perverse effraction into the infant is beyond consent, and leaves behind an imprint that indelibly marks the child. We will revisit seduction in chapters 1 and 2 of this volume, and it will help us discern how subjectivity and the subject-object relationship are inaugurated through encounters that materialize at the border of our consent, encounters that create messiness from which we can never fully extricate ourselves, and that, to boot, vibrate on an erotic frequency. Accordingly, although Mia's dramatic beginnings come to us from the consulting room, it raises issues that are not unique to psychoanalytic work. We are all routinely humbled by how our experience of autonomy and sense of sovereignty are delimited by the unexpected and the unforeseen arising in our encounter with the other. Such contact with opacity and with the unknown may whet appetites we did not know we had, embroiling us in situations we may have not chosen to get tangled into. We do not always get to draft the conditions of our interpersonal encounters to which we have to sometimes submit, sometimes surrender, to get part of what we need or want. Such surrender, Mia's case underscores, is not necessarily welcome or relieving. That is, Mia was not thrilled with the circumstances of our origin story, and neither was I. But let us also note, recalling Carmen from earlier in our discussion, that while Carmen did not blame Ava, but recoiled from the experience, Mia accused me, but did not recoil. Her inventive solution, that we worked together against her consent, could be seen as an effort to find a way to stay in relation with me, not to move away from, but to move into the gap space between us. We could say that I, too, in agreeing to start analytic work under this peculiar premise, relinquished my hold over the way I understand how the work should begin. To enter the analytic relationship at all, then, Mia and I both had to suspend our expectations. And both of us did so against our consent, having to bend our will. Of course, Mia's dynamics inform what she brings to and how she handles her feelings about my fee. The same applies to me and my handling of the situation. However good I think my reasons may be, an ethical relation to alterity, writes Leon, does not sediment difference into the domesticated realm. Which means that Mia's original presentation was not a hurdle to be cleared, but the very site of our ethical engagement. Such ethical engagement will not always be easy, uncomplicated, or generous, which is one reason why we may not come to it willingly, but despite ourselves, as was the case with Mia and me. To suppress this resistance, both Mia and I had to bend our wills, to step not just into the unknown, but into a terrain that felt somewhat tricky or dangerous to both of us. Psychoanalysis has treated racial, gendered, and sexual otherness atrociously, so if even the invocation of the term sets off red flags, you are in good company. And even when more inclusive psychoanalysis remains easily caught in the stranglehold of neoliberal logics, inculcated in prioritizing thinking about productivity or value. In Chapter 4, I discuss how the concepts of sublimation and creativity offer themselves as alibis to this capitalist slant. To me, however, the analyst's job is not to heal. It is to resist the narrative of restoration or repair, to refuse the idea that anyone ever returns to some prelapsarian moment, to the restoration of innocence before trauma, or to the harmonious reconciliation towards a utopian future. The analyst, in other words, cannot afford to be traumatophobic. She needs to be a traumatophilic. Much more important, then, repair is a non-dominating relationship between the subject, the ego, and her unconscious, which also means a non-dominating relationship between the subject and the object. What this requires is a frustrating of the subject's desire, her will, to master the world through conceptual and practical activity, including understanding and insight. The psychoanalytic attitude involves, rather, signing up for the unexpected, for surprise, and for contradiction. That makes psychoanalysis into an aesthetic practice. It is also what makes it an adventure. I wrote this book in that vein. I was drawn to writing it as my way of coping with the strain of watching slave play, a play that, as you will read in Chapter 4, overwhelmed and startled me. I wrote this book because I could not look away, because I wanted, or more precisely, because I needed to forge a relationship with the aesthetic experience that slave play roused in me. The risk of reading this book, no less the risk of writing it, is to experience what happens when we expose ourselves to something unknown, not knowing where it will take us, including to unfamiliar concepts and texts, or to defamiliarized uses of concepts and texts we thought we already knew. I also wrote this book for you, not the plural you, but the singular you. You can read it for its ideas, and I hope you will, but it is not only a book about ideas. It is a book that also wants to give you an experience. Writing this way is a risk. It requires a great vulnerability of me. Writing this book has also led me to places I did not expect to go, to experiences I did not expect to have. It has taken me to places that scare me. More than once, I found myself becoming something much bigger than myself, towering over me. I've written this book so that you can follow me. I've written this book so that you can follow me there. You do not know what you will experience, what you will encounter, how it may disturb you, how it might set in motion in you. But if you stay with me, if you go slowly, if you linger in the interstitial space between reach and grasp, then this book can give you more. It can demand something of you. Perhaps you will have an experience yourself. More than anything, I wrote this book for readers who savor their experiences, who are willing to push themselves to the limits of self-understanding, who are able, and eager even, to bend their will, for readers willing to be pulled out of reason, to tread into something raw and tender, for readers who yearn to go beyond the sensible. There is an elsewhere in yourself to which these pages may take you. I have, in fact, written this book imagining you giving yourself over to me, which is a strange thing to say given that I do not know you. Neither do you. Let us begin.